So today we're going to talk about how to deduct the expenses of your vacation in the summer. Let's first start with the basic principles of deducting anything. Anything can be deductible if it's done right. Hi, I'm a CPA. I've been doing this for 45 years, including years in the National Tax Office of one of the big firms in Washington, D.C. First rule, there must be a legitimate business purpose to the expense. That means there has to be a legitimate business reason that you are traveling. And it's not enough as a business purpose to actually say, well, I'm going to work while I'm there. No, because you didn't have to travel. There wasn't a business purpose to the expense. You could have done that while you stayed home. You didn't need to travel to do your work. Think about that. That's got to be a business purpose. Now that's pretty broad. What's a business purpose? I'm going to go see clients. I'm going to go see investors and go to a conference. I might be going to get away from things so that I can write because I'm a writer, or I'm going to go do some video because I'm an influencer. I want to be an influencer. I've got a podcast. I want to do some videos out here, and they have a potential to make money. That's enough for a business purpose. But remember, there are 3 other rules. The second rule is the expense must be ordinary, which means it's typical. So would it be typical for you to travel to South Africa to do a video on real estate? Well, if you're selling real estate in South Africa, it might be, but probably you could travel to New Mexico and do the same video. It's got to be ordinary or typical in your profession in order for it to be deductible. It's got to be necessary. Now, necessary, I think, means the intent of the trip is to make a profit. It could be expanding your knowledge. That's a conference, continuing education. It could be that it is meeting with potential customers. It doesn't have to be current customers. That would be expanding the profit. But remember, it really does need to be intentional. And so I think that's a good word for necessary is in the intention is to do it to make a profit. And then the fourth one is really critical when it comes to travel expenses, because of course the IRS is looking out for this. They don't believe travel expenses should be deductible. The IRS takes the view is, hey, you need to prove it to us, because the general rule is travel expenses are not deductible. Only business travel is deductible. You really need to document it really well. In real estate, you know, the rule, most important word in real estate is location, location, location. In tax deductions, it's documentation, documentation, documentation. So don't forget to document really well. Now, what are you documenting? You're documenting those things I was just talking about. What is the business purpose? Now, you could document this in minutes that you record for your shareholders meeting or your members meeting, your partners meeting. So you can document it in minutes. This would be a good way to do it. Here's why I'm going. This is what I'm doing. This 2-week trip is going to be really important. Travel has its own special rules. And here's generally the rule. The primary purpose or principal purpose of the travel has to be business. Well, what does that mean? The IRS has interpreted this to mean that you need to spend more than half your day doing business that could only be done in that location. Remember, here's the good news. IRS auditors, they work Monday through Friday. They don't understand that business people work Saturday and Sunday. So they're not counting Saturday and Sunday. So here's what I like to do. I like to turn a 5-day trip into a 10-day trip, get the whole thing deductible and still do personal activity and maybe even family activity. Here's what you do. We go on Friday and we do business Friday. And we make sure that Friday is a business day. Saturday and Sunday, we do whatever we want. They're not business days anyway. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we spend 4.5 hours doing legitimate business activities. Saturday and Sunday, again, not business days. We just need to be there because Monday, we have a very important appointment before we leave for home. So we're going to make sure that we have to be there on Friday. And then 10 days later, we have to be there on Monday. We're going to get our weekends deductible, even though we're not doing any business on the weekend, because we had to be there on the weekend in order to do business the next week. What are some things you could be doing? Let's say that you're going to a conference. I remember when I was in the Tax Executives Institute, I was actually president of our local chapter. I remember their annual meeting. And I love this. The conference started at 8 o'clock in the morning. It ended at 12:30. The rest of the day was ours. Gee, why would it start at 8 o'clock and end at 12:30? Well, because that's 4.5 hours of conference. Means that more than half the day was spent doing business. Could only be done there because we're at a conference. So they did that for 3 days. It was great. So we got the rest of the day to ourselves. Well, that means that your airfare is deductible. Your hotel's deductible. Your meals are deductible. All of that's going to be deductible. Now, in the U.S. travel, 48 states, if you're traveling in the U.S., then it's an all or nothing. It's not proportionate. So if you're international and you go on Friday, the weekends you don't do any business, not deductible, okay? Or any days you don't do business, they're not deductible. It's proportionate. For example, let's say I'm speaking in London, and let's say I speak for 2 days and then I take 3 days off. Well, that means 40% of my travel, 40% of my meals, 40% is going to be deductible. It's proportionate. But inside the US, it's all or nothing. If you do 4 hours, not 4.5 hours, then you lose everything. So make sure that you do that 4.5 hours. It's got to be something you have to do because you're there. So that means, for example, if you're in real estate, then you're actually looking at properties there because you're thinking of investing in that location. You would have to be there. I'll give you a good example. I had a client, John. He and his wife used to travel to New Mexico all the time. He lived in Arizona, traveled to New Mexico, and he did it like fairly regularly. And so I was explaining to him, because he came to me and he says, so this is part of the tax strategy that I was doing with it. How do I make that deductible? And so I was explaining these rules and I said, look, you need to spend 4.5 hours a day while you're there looking at real estate there and looking at opportunities. Now he was a real estate investor. A couple of months later, he calls me up and says, Tom, we got to meet. I got to tell you and talk about this travel that I've been doing. I said, okay. He was really excited. Let's sit down. He tells me that he went and looked at properties. He spent 4.5 hours a day looking at properties, sometimes more than 4.5 hours a day, because he was very interested in properties in New Mexico. And I said, that's great. I said, yeah. And you documented? Yes, documented it. Everything's good. So it's deductible. Great. He says, but there's more to the story. I said, well, let's hear the rest of the story. He says, I found a deal. And the deal I found, I think will net me $1 million before taxes when I do this deal. It's a land development deal. It's been there for a long time, but I've never seen it before because I was looking for it. And I asked him, I said, how much do you think this deduction is worth to you over the course of a year? He said, about $4,000. We calculated it out. And he was spending about $10,000 in a 40% tax bracket. So about $4,000. I said, okay, so the government spends $4,000 and you do a deal that produces $1 million of income on which you'll probably pay $300,000 of tax approximately. He says, yeah, that's about right. I said, sounds like a pretty good deal for the government. He hadn't thought about it that way. Here's the moral of this story. Our minds only see what we're looking for. What that means is that when we do business, when we take travel, the reason the government gives us this tax break is because they want us to succeed in business. This is a partnership. Remember, you are a partner with the government, whether you like it or not. You're a partner with the government. You don't get to choose that. Because you live here, you're a partner with the government. The question is, what kind of partner are you? What the government would like you to do is actively engage in business and produce more revenue so that you can pay more taxes. So they're willing to put an investment in order for you to have the incentive to go do business where you're traveling. With John, that meant $1 million of income he would never have found had he not been looking for the tax deduction. Tax deductions are so important to the economy. If we didn't have the tax deduction, would John have ever been looking? And the answer was no, because that property had been there. That deal had been there for years. He'd never seen it, and he'd been by it 100 times. Only when he was looking for it did he find it. Be careful. John was specifically looking for real estate. He had to do it there. If John had just gone there and said, well, I'm going to bring my laptop with me, I'm going to work while I'm on vacation, no deduction. Second of all, John took his wife. His wife was involved in his real estate business. Therefore, he got to deduct the expenses for his wife as well. If his wife had not been involved in the real estate business, we would not have gotten the deduction for his wife. That is very well documented. You are not going to win that in court. I've seen so many people say, well, my children are on my board of directors. And so when I take them on vacation and I do business, you know what? It's deductible. No, it's not. You can't slap lipstick on a pig and say it's not a pig. It doesn't work that way. What you have to do is, if you want your kids involved, that's fine. Have them go out and look. I'll give you another example. When I was traveling a lot with Robert Kiyosaki, we go to London fairly regularly to speak in London. Our driver was this fellow, and he was from Italy. He was looking for a vacation place, but it was one he was going to rent out. He sent his 8-year-old to do the work. I met his 8-year-old. His 8-year-old could absolutely do this. Here's what happened. He had the real estate, the 8-year-old did all the research. The 8-year-old contacted the real estate. The real estate agent said, okay, we're going to meet. The 8-year-old's dad says, yeah, you're going with him. He is my agent. Go look. The 8-year-old went with the agent, trusted the agent. They went and looked at different properties. The 8-year-old came back and he said, Dad, I've done all of the work. on it, and it just doesn't make financial sense. This is an 8-year-old. I had another 8-year-old did bookkeeping. She did all of her dad's bookkeeping, whether they're 8-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, or even a 2-year-old who's just modeling for you, but you have to involve them while you're traveling if they're not actually involved. And by the way, I would pay them for the work they're doing. On top of getting their expenses deductible, you also get to deduct the payment of their salary. So you get a double benefit when you take your kids and you actually involve them in the business and they really are doing the work. You just can't say, well, we had a board meeting, blah, 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 and we're done. Or like I knew one guy, he said, every time I go out on my boat on the weekend, I take my family and we talk about business, therefore the boat's deductible. I doubt that that's going to hold muster when it gets to tax court. They're going to lose that one. Now, on the other hand, if they're all really involved in the business on a day-to-day basis, probably will. They'll probably get that. Boating is different because boating's entertainment. So you're not going to get that for entertainment. So entertainment doesn't work. But if you have a legitimate business purpose, you've got a business purpose, it's ordinary, it's necessary, and you're well documented, you get that deduction, you'll probably make more money, which is just what the government intends. If you want to deduct your next vacation legally, there's a 5-step process you have to follow. My team has put together a brilliant cheat sheet for teaching you just how to walk through those 5 steps. If the IRS ever challenges you, you're going to win that IRS audit and keep that deduction. You can download it with the link below. So Trump just came out with a new tax bill and it has serious impacts for investors and business owners. If you're an investor or you're a business owner, you're going to want to watch this video by clicking on the link below.